No! Rob, you were not in the attack zone when you grabbed Clay around the throat.
Not exactly the choke I was looking for, but I guess that's what happens when you have two B's in your name. Internet, my name is Peridiam, and in the spirit of another Survivor season coming to an end, I figured, let's talk about players who blew a lead. Not everyone gets to fulfill their destiny of being hoisted by the jury in a celebratory round of applause. Some instead just get hoisted by their own petard. You were this close. Wait, you were up by 25 with less than 30 to go and you lost? You had an idol? An immunity streak? Safety in numbers? How did this happen? That being said, I have talked about players who lost the game at the Final Tribal Council before. Nalia, Coach, Mike. Both of them. These players could have potentially won had they done a better job in front of the jury, but for this video, I am looking at players who probably should have won before they even reached the final tribal. In other words, had most of them made it to the final 3 or 2, it was a layup of a win. Take, for example, players who just needed to win the final challenge of the season to secure their victory. For most challenges, I wouldn't hold a loss against anyone too much. Challenges they're random, they can't prepare much for them, and some clearly favor certain players. So if you're not the favorite to win them and you lose, did you really choke? A player like Suri on season 16 Micronesia went into the final challenge that involved balancing a ball on some blocks, focus, and endurance. And given Suri is a nurse, you could argue she had the upper hand here. No pun intended. Even she has admitted she thought she was the favorite to win this. But she lost and was then voted out in 3rd place. I have Suri as an honorable mention only because I've heard being a nurse doesn't really mean you're going to be able to do this. And also, even though I do think Suri wins that final 3 against Amanda and Parvati, we will never know for sure. She definitely wins a final 2 though, which is what we're talking about. But then, at number 10, I have Kelly Wentworth from season 31 Cambodia, who is practically next to Suri on this list. But I've put Kelly higher because she straight up told us that in the final challenge of the season, the final 4 were able to practice the challenge, and she killed it. Yeah, the final 4 got a practice round before what we got to see on screen. So going into the actual run, the one we saw, she was the favorite. And then she blew it. Had she won, had she gone 2 for 2, best of 3, she easily beats Tasha and Spencer in the final 3, and the domino effect of her on Winners at War is immeasurable.
Oh my God.
Kelly Wentworth is out. No shot at immunity. We are down to 3.
Oh my God.
At number 9, I have another player who I think everyone is expecting to make this list. Some might say should be as high as number 1, but we got a lot of ground to cover here. In season 23 South Pacific, I am talking about Ozzy, who battles his way back into the game twice, both at the merge and at the final 5, wins duel after duel after duel, wins the final 5 immunity challenge, and then has a fairly decent lead in the final challenge of this season, and then blows it at the puzzle. Puzzles are the great equalizer, and Ozzy couldn't figure this one out to save his life. He was the biggest underdog socially and the biggest overdog competitively, and he just had to match 8 stupid flower puzzle pieces to win $1 million. However, to qualify for this list, Ozzy is considered the greatest challenge beast in Survivor history. And, you know, God, bread and butter, man, to lose it at this moment is nothing short of ironic. For that sheer footnote alone, I gotta put him right here.
Sophie wins final immunity!
After Ozzy lost the challenge, there really wasn't much he could do to change his fate. Same for Kelly or Suri or many other players. But then, going forward with this list, we have players who I think did need to be immune and lost the challenge, but also could have realistically and easily done more before they got to this point to save themselves from being in this position at all. At number 8, from season 6, The Amazon, I have Rob. Rob lost the final challenge and was voted out in 3rd. His closest ally, Matthew, even threw the challenge knowing he was going to reach the final 2 either way. Jenna was likely a stronger competitor for something like this. It's pretty negligible. I won't fault Rob too much. But what edges him higher than Ozzy or Kelly is that he makes an unforced error at the final 6 by voting out Christy over Heidi or Jenna. Rob had a working group of 4 versus Jenna and Heidi, and unfortunately for him, Christy was waffling on what she wanted to do. She also made an unforced error here, and that caused Rob to react impulsively and vote her out. But Rob has gone on to admit that this was his biggest mistake. Christy did side with him in the end, and had he voted out Heidi or Jenna, the likelihood of the other going in the next round is really high. And I think we can kind of figure out the boot order from here, and I think a final 3 of Matthew and Butch is much more in Rob's favor to win, especially if Matthew is still throwing the challenge, and then it's just like Rob versus Butch at that final 3 in an endurance challenge.
The threat of Christy defecting terrifies me, which got me to really start thinking about an alternative scenario. I can't believe I'm back in Jenna and Heidi's good graces. I've made the promise to them that I'm not going to screw them on this. They've made a promise to me they're not going to screw me on this. And let's see what happens.
I would say Rob's case is the least egregious and clear-cut of those who fumbled before even the final challenge. Which leads me to number 7. From season 38, Edge of Extinction, I have Rick Devens. Yes, Rick lost firemaking in record time to Chris Underwood at the final 4. Sorry for him, but that's not what leads me to putting him this high. Rick basically loses the game at the final 5, sometime early in the morning, once he sits down and gives Chris a full-fledged idol, allowing the guy to reach the final 4 guaranteed. And while it could be argued Rick needed friends and only Chris was extending an olive branch, it needs to be said that Rick also had an idol in this moment. Before Rick gives Chris his half of the idol over to enable Chris to have his own full idol, Rick himself finds an idol in the dark of night and is guaranteed safety to the final 4. Which means the only thing Rick should worry about is who he thinks stands the best chance at beating him in either the final challenge or the firemaking. And of the remaining 5, I gotta think Chris is now his stiffest competition toward winning either. Rick has said that he didn't have the heart to not give it back to Chris, to do him dirty like that. And I know Rick knows this, and I'm gonna say it again, armchair quarterback here. I would also argue that that's what it often takes to win the game. You do what you gotta do. It's a game. Rick, you can buy him a beer after the season.
Dude, you want this now? Yes. Congratulations, you have a full-blown immunity idol.
When Rick gives me that piece of the idol back, I was so relieved because he could have betrayed me.
Number 6 is the inverse of Rick, because if Rick had less of a heart, he wins. But in the case of Johnny Fairplay on season 7 Pearl Islands, it was his dastardly double dealing that did him in at the end. Of course, Fairplay did reach the final 3 and was up against Lil in a squatting challenge to win $1 million. Twice his age, Lil proved to be quite good at this challenge and beat him in what appeared to be an upset. I was shocked Fairplay lost here, and I would definitely say it is a bit of a choke. But even more than just this final challenge, if we head back to the final 5, we also see Fairplay and Burton totally fumble the bag this round when they target Dara ahead of Sandra and in the process sketch out Lil, causing her to flip on them. Had Fairplay waited to target Dara until after the immunity challenge when, Dara was already safe and she couldn't be, so he wouldn't, he could have likely flipped Sandra or Dara or both against Lil and voted her out, as they tried to do so in the episode. But because Fairplay and Burton mistimed their scheming, and then because Burton took Fairplay on reward with him, this gave Lil ample time to ruminate and flip the script. Fairplay underestimated Lil in more ways than just what we saw at the final 3, but if he was able to vote her out at the final 5, Dara goes at 4, Sandra then at 3, and I would wager Fairplay wins the season because Burton's an outcast. Fairplay just needed to be a bit more considerate of Lil's perspective, of her opinion on upsetting the apple cart, and he probably still holds all the power at the final 5 and through the endgame.
Are we worried about the girls strategizing against us?
Yeah, exactly.
I felt like we were pretty confident in our abilities.
Yeah, I think we can squash their plans pretty quickly. John and I have been running the show for the last 20 days nearly, and those 3 girls, I don't think they could come up with a decent strategy if they had to.
And this next one is gonna be tragic. Because while everyone else in this video ended their game for $1 million, you can't say the same for number 5. From season 40, Winners at War, Sarah lost $2 million with her votes against Ben at the final 5. And unlike Fairplay, we're 40 seasons deep now, and this move was just all about positioning. Basically, at the final 5, Sarah is the swing vote between either voting out Ben or Michelle. It's 2-2, and she is the decider. And she makes the wrong choice. Sarah needed to keep Ben, if only for two clear reasons. Ben was in her corner at the Final Four, and Ben is very likely the favorite to take out Tony in the fire-making challenge. Play it out with me, because if Sarah keeps Ben and votes out Michelle, if Natalie wins the final challenge, which she did, she likely puts up Ben against Tony. Meanwhile, if Ben wins the final challenge, he definitely takes Sarah with him to the finals. And I think Tony takes Sarah too. So kinda like Rick, Sarah needed to find a way to both secure a spot in the final three and eliminate her biggest threat beforehand. Ben was that way. Tony has said repeatedly he was never great at making fire, but he did beat Sarah at it, but up against Ben. Yeah, I feel pretty good about those odds. Instead, Sarah kept Michelle, and then Michelle, who was closer to Natalie, told her that she didn't feel good about going to fire. And so Natalie took Michelle instead to the final three, and Sarah never even got a chance to pitch her case to the jury in the first place. And for an all-winner season, I'm gonna be a little bit more critical of what I'm examining here. The ball was in Sarah's court. She held the power. She was the swing vote. And when you look at the state of the endgame, it seems pretty clear what Sarah needed to do. Should have played like a criminal again.
Put my name down, use that as your resume, and win it, I'm for it. No, I'm serious though.
But in order for me to even have a shot, I have to make a move. And I have to make a move without Tony.
18th person voted out of Survivor, winners at war. Ben.
Number 4 is another state of unfortunate affairs, even more so than Sarah, as this player was leading the pack the entire post-merge, was the front runner to win, held all the cards, and just kept making the wrong choices again and again. Probably should be higher, to be honest. He got duped, and I'm talking about Rafe from season 11, Guatemala. Rafe was the shot caller of the quote-unquote Axis of Evil alliance that held the numbers. This was basically an ideal alliance of goats that Rafe was leading to the slaughter. You're telling me you got Jamie, Judd, Stephanie, and who the heck knows what's going on with Cindy? Perhaps the only player here who was socially loved was Lydia. But then Rafe consistently decides to keep Danny, the lone underdog of the endgame, safe at every round to instead bring Stephanie closer to him in the event that she won the final challenge. Danny was the lone survivor of the opposing decimated alliance and got in good with Rafe. Cut him a sweet deal to take him to the final two if she was in the position to do so. And Rafe bought it hook, line, and sinker. He did ultimately want to take Steph to the final two, but hey, why not put himself in the final three with two players who were going to take him either way? Except, well, he's in this video for a reason. Rafe overplayed and overthought how to make this all work. He voted out Jamie, Judd, Cindy, and Lydia over Stephanie, believing Lydia was a bigger threat in the final challenge, given historic precedents where older women often do well at endurance. Except that's not true. If you dig a little bit deeper as a superfan of Survivor, Lil is actually more of an outlier. While Danny was malnourished, she was also a massive, massive threat to win over the jury, and it showed. And I think at the end of this, Rafe is number 4 because he just had all the time to secure a winnable final 3, 4, 5, and yet got outplayed by himself.
16th person voted out of Survivor Guatemala.
Before I get to number 3, I'm gonna do something unusual. I'm gonna reveal number 2 and number 1. If only because they stand out amongst the rest of this list and would even be above the players who lost the game at the final tribal council. Which, by the way, you could just basically take that video and supplant it below my top 2 if you're wondering about a complete order. Because number 2 is Colby from season 2, the Australian Outback, and number 1 is Wu from season 28, Cagayan. And even though, yeah, Colby also did a terrible job at final tribal, I consider Colby taking Tina and Wu taking Tony to be the 2 worst game-ending chokes in Survivor history. If only because they were knocking on the door of winning the million and then decided to take the road less traveled. Instead of opening the front door, they decided to try to climb through the second-story window, then fell out into a ditch and made their odds of winning unfathomably worse. And I know season 2 was a while ago, it was a different time. Colby wanted to be the good guy, but his decision to vote out Keith at the final 3 pretty much cost him the game. And while he does get 3 jury votes, and I think there's a possibility of a 4th if he puts up maybe a better performance at the final tribal and maybe Tina doesn't do so well. It's tough to just ignore that he alone put himself in that position when he didn't have to. I give Tina all the props in the world for getting that close to Colby, but make no mistake, Colby all but formally won the game after he won the final immunity challenge, and then he got 2nd place?
The 14th person voted out of the tribe,
And the same goes to Wu, only to an even worse degree. Wu is 26 seasons later. He straight up says on camera that taking Tony would be a dumb move. And then he does so anyway. No amount of time was needed for Cass to convince Wu to vote out Tony here. He already knew the assignment. And I very much believe Wu beats Cass. Although I would have loved to see Cass pitch her case to that jury. Wait, why couldn't this just be a final 3 again? Either way, Colby is number 2 and Wu is number 1 for game-ending chokes in Survivor history. No question.
15th person voted out and the 9th and final member of our jury.
Which means that number 3 is kind of like the new number 1. It's not number 1, but we're gonna side-eye it anyway. From season 25, Philippines, I'm talking about Malcolm. Malcolm lost the final challenge, where he on paper should be the frontrunner. But this challenge wasn't for him, even with an advantage going in. The advantage was garbage and negligible if you were never good at the skills required to win this challenge anyway. Malcolm wasn't. But then, can we just rewind for a second? Malcolm put himself in this spot where he didn't need to. He got duped by Lisa and Scoopin, of all people, at the final 4. Malcolm was the frontrunner to win the season, and he knew it, and we knew it, and why wasn't he playing like it? At that fated final 5, a lot of final 5s in this video, he's got the immunity necklace around his neck and an idol in his pocket, and Abby Maria, the goat of the season, is looking for friends. Malcolm, throw her a bone. Why Malcolm doesn't break up the Scoopin and Lisa duo going into the final 4 is bizarre. I still remember watching this episode a decade ago thinking the exact same thing. And he didn't because he trusted them to take him to the final 3, which, yes, was a very easily winnable final 3. But in doing so, he gave them the power to decide his fate. When you're the frontrunner, you do what you need to do to keep the power in your corner. If he gives Abby the idol and he and Denise vote out Lisa or Scoopin, they're in charge at the final 4. And even if they do say vote out Lisa and Scoopin is still there and wins that final challenge, he's likely got Denise to help him vote out Abby. Certainly Scoopin would do the same thing. But then he votes out Abby, okay, and at least has Denise with him for a potential 2-2 if he doesn't win immunity at this final 4. But before the challenge, he gets too comfortable and denies validating Denise's desires to go to the final 3 with him. She's like, hey, Malcolm, you wanna go? And he waffles, and she just reads the room. And so Denise justifiably flips on him and goes and sinks his game. But Malcolm, you could have easily avoided this at the final 5 and the final 4, both in the timeline that we saw and the timeline where he keeps Abby at that final 5. 10 years later, still not over it, he totally fumbles the bag and literally drops the ball beyond just winning immunity. And for all that, as much as I love the guy and he's still one of my favorites, I have him at number 3 on this list, ahead of pretty much all the rest.
15th person voted out and the 8th and final member of our jury. Malcolm. Malcolm, Travis spoken.
And that's it. Those are the top 10 game-ending chokes in Survivor history, featuring Rob with 2 Bs. Let me know what you think about this list and the topic overall. I think it's absolutely up for debate, and believe me, my ranking changed a lot before I settled on the final video. A big thank you to my patrons for all your support, for not blowing it at the end. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to have 1 foot in the attack zone on your way out, and I will see you in the next one. Once I...
Whoa, guys, hold up.
What did I just say? 1 foot in the attack zone. Come on, y'all.
Ken, you were not in the attack zone when you first made contact. You're out of the game. Stephanie, what are you doing? You were in the water. You're nowhere close to the attack zone. Another penalty. He's not in it. No, Jed, you weren't in the attack zone when you first made contact. Come on, guys, I'm like a broken record.
That last time, he came at me and I put my hands out and pushed him in. He's a weak little whiny punk, backwoods hick. Did you hear him? Screaming at me, dude. I wanted to spit in his face.